everyone, I'm Miss Mary Beth, and I'm here today for Armchair Adventures. And that's our series where every day I read a little bit of a book to you, and eventually we finish a whole book together. And the book we're reading right now is The Princess and the Goblin. And this one was written by George MacDonald. Have you been reading with me? Do you know what it's about? It's okay if you haven't. What it's about is this princess named Irene, who's about 8 years old, and she lives in a castle with her nurse and her staff and relatives and stuff. And she doesn't know it, but goblins live below the castle, below the ground. And they don't really like the royal family, because years and years ago, before Irene was part of it, the royal family sent the goblins down to the ground and didn't allow them to come back up. So they don't really like the king. So, because of that, Princess Irene isn't allowed to go outside at night. The goblins sleep during the day. They're the opposite of us. And they come out at night. So Irene can never go out at night. Except she does, doesn't she? She's accidentally out late one night with her nurse because they get lost. And they come across a goblin, but they get rescued by this very nice 12-year-old boy named Curdy. Curdy knows what to do, so he helps them and gets them home safely that night. And where we left off was that Curdy was mining at night. He mines with his dad underground near where the goblins live. And he was mining at night and he overheard the goblins' plan to... Well, he didn't hear the plan. He heard that there is a plan to overtake the king. But he doesn't know the details of the goblins' plan. So let's see what happens next. And the next chapter is Chapter 10, The Princess's King Papa. And we haven't met him yet. We haven't met the king. So let's see. The weather continued fine for weeks, and the little princess went out every day. So long a period of fine weather had indeed never been known upon that mountain. The only uncomfortable thing was that her nurse was so nervous and particular about being in before the sun was down, that often she would take to her heels when nothing worse than a fleecy cloud crossing the sun threw a shadow on the hillside. And many an evening they were home a full hour before the sunlight had left the weathercock on the stables. If it had not been for such odd behavior, Irene would by this time have almost forgotten the goblins. She never forgot Curdy, but him she remembered for his own sake, and indeed would have remembered him if only because a princess never forgets her debts until they are paid. One splendid sunshiny day, about an hour after noon, Irene, who was playing on a lawn in the garden, heard a distant blast of a bugle. She jumped up with a cry of joy, for she knew that particular blast, that her father was on his way to see her. This part of the garden lay on the slope of the hill and allowed a full view of the country below. So she shaded her eyes with her hand and looked far away to catch the first glimpse of shining armor. In a few moments a little troop came glittering around the shoulder of a hill. Spears and helmets were sparkling and gleaming, banners were flying, horses were prancing, and again came the bugle blast, which to her was like the voice of her father calling across the distance, "Irene, I'm coming!" On and on they came until she could clearly distinguish the king. He rode on a white horse and was taller than any of the men with him. He wore a narrow circle of gold set with jewels around his helmet, and as he came still nearer, Irene could discern the flashing of the stones in the sun. It was a long time since he had been to see her, and her little heart beat faster and faster as the shining troop approached, for she loved her king papa very dearly, and was nowhere so happy as in his arms. When they reached a certain point, after which she could see them no more from the garden, she ran to the gate, and there stood till up they come clanging and stamping, with one more bright bugle blast, which said, "Irene, I am come." By this time the people at the house were all gathered at the gate, but Irene stood alone in the front of them. When the horseman pulled up, she ran to the side of the white horse and held up her arms. The king stopped and shook her hands. In an instant, Irene was on the saddle and clasped in his great strong arms. I wish I could describe the king so that you could see him in your mind. He had gentle blue eyes, but a nose that made him look like an eagle. He had a long dark beard streaked with silvery lines that flowed from his mouth almost to his waist. And as Irene sat on the saddle and hid her glad face upon his bosom, it mingled with the golden hair which her mother had given her, and the two together were like a cloud with streaks of the sun woven through it. After he had held her to his heart for a minute, he spoke to his white horse, and the great beautiful creature, which had been prancing so proudly a little while before, walked as gently as a lady, for he knew he had a little lady on his back. through the gate and up the front door of the house. Then the king set her on the ground and, dismounting, took Irene's hand and walked with her into the great hall, which was hardly ever entered except when he came to see his little princess. There the king sat down, with 2 of his counselors who had accompanied him, to have some refreshment, and Irene sat at his right hand and drank her milk out of a wooden bowl curiously carved. After the king had eaten and drunk, he turned to the princess and said, stroking her hair, "Now, my child, what shall we do next?" This was the question he almost always put to her first after their meal together, and Irene had been waiting for it with some impatience, for now, she thought, she should be able to settle a question which constantly perplexed her. Do you remember this part? The part where Irene was exploring in the castle and she met a very, very old lady? We have to remember that bit. Because Irene says, "I should like you to take me to see my great old grandmother." The king looked very grave and said, "What does my little daughter mean?" "I mean the Queen Irene that lives up in the tower, the very old lady, you know, with the long hair of silver." The king only gazed at his little princess with a look which she could not understand. "She's got her crown in her bedroom," Irene went on, "but I've not been in there yet. You know she's there, don't you?" "No," said the king, very quietly. "Then it all must be a dream," said Irene. "I half thought it was, but I couldn't be sure. Now I am sure of it. Besides, I couldn't find her the next time I went up." At that moment, a snow-white pigeon flew in at an open window and settled upon Irene's head. She broke into a merry laugh, cowered a little, and put up her hands to her head, saying, "Dear Dovey, don't peck me. You'll pull out my hair with your long claws if you don't mind it." The king stretched out his hand to take the pigeon, but it spread its wings and flew again through the open window, when its whiteness made one flash in the sun and vanished. The king laid his hand on his princess's head, held it back a little, gazed in her face, smiled a half-smile, and sighed half a sigh. "Come, my child, we'll have a walk in the garden together," he said. "You won't come up and see my huge, great, beautiful grandmother, then, King Papa?" said the princess. "Not this time," said the king, very gently. "She has not invited me, you know, and great old ladies like her do not choose to be visited without leave asked and given." The garden was a very lovely place. Being upon a mountainside, there were parts in it where the rocks came through in great masses, and all immediately about them remained quite wild. Tufts of heather grew upon them, and other hardy mountain plants and flowers, while near them would be lovely roses and lilies and all pleasant garden flowers. The mingling of the wild mountain with the civilized garden was very quaint, and it was impossible for any number of gardeners to make such a garden look formal and stiff. Against one of these rocks was a garden seat, shadowed from the sun by the overhanging of the rock itself. There was a little winding path up to the top of the rock, and on top another seat, but they sat on the seat at its foot because the sun was hot, and they talked together of many things. At length the king said, "You were out late one evening, Irene." "Yes, Papa," she answered. "It was my fault. And Ludi, nurse, remember, was very sorry." "I must talk to Ludi about it," said the king. "Don't speak loud to her, please, Papa," said Irene. "She's been so afraid of being late ever since. Indeed, she has not been naughty. It was only a mistake for once." "Once might be too often," murmured the king to himself as he stroked his child's head. I can't tell you how he had come to know. I'm sure Curdie had not told him. Someone about the palace must have seen them, after all. The king sat for a good while thinking. There was no sound to be heard except that of a little stream which ran merrily out of an opening in the rock by where they sat. Then the king rose, leaving Irene where she was, went into the house and sent for Ludi, with whom he had a talk that made her cry. I'm sure he was gentle, but do you like getting in trouble? When in the evening he rode away upon his great white horse, the king left 6 of his attendants behind him, with orders that 3 of them should watch outside the house every night. Walking round and round it from sunset to sunrise, it was clear he was not quite comfortable about the princess. And that was the end of chapter 10. So now we're on to chapter 11, the old lady's bedroom. Do you think Irene's going to find the old lady again? Let's see. Nothing more happened worth telling for some time. The autumn came and went by. There were no more flowers in the garden. The wind blew strong and howled among the rocks. The rain fell and drenched the few yellow and red leaves that could not get off the other branches. Again and again there would be a glorious morning followed by a pouring afternoon. And sometimes for a week together there would be rain, nothing but rain, all day. And then the most lovely cloudless night, with the sky all out in full-blown stars, not one missing. But the princess could not see much of them, for she went to bed early. The winter drew on, and she found things growing dreary. When it was too stormy to go out, and she had tired of her toys, Ludi would take her about the house, sometimes to the housekeeper's room, where the housekeeper, who was a good, kind old woman, made much of her, sometimes to the servants' hall or the kitchen, where she was not Princess merely, but an absolute queen, and ran a great risk of being spoiled. Sometimes she would run off herself into the room where the men-at-arms whom the king had left sat, and they showed her their arms and accoutrements, and did what they could to amuse her. Still, at times, Irene found it very dreary, and often wished that her huge great-grandmother had not been a dream. One morning, the nurse left her with the housekeeper for a while. To amuse her, she turned out the contents of an old cabinet upon the table. The little princess found her treasures, queer and ancient ornaments, and many things, the use of which she could not imagine, far more interesting than her own toys, and she sat playing with them for 2 hours or more. But at length, in handling a curious old-fashioned brooch, she ran the pin of it into her thumb, and gave a little scream with the sharpness of the pain. But would have thought little more of it had the pain not increased and her thumb began to swell. This alarmed the housekeeper greatly. The nurse was fetched, the doctor was sent for, her hand was poulticed, and long before her usual time, Irene was put to bed. The pain still continued, and although she fell asleep and dreamed a good many dreams, there was always the pain in every dream. Poor Irene. At last the pain woke her up. The moon was shining brightly in the room. The poultice had fallen off of her hands, and it was burning hot. She fancied if she could hold it into the moonlight, that would cool it. So she got out of bed, without waking the nurse who lay at the other end of the room, and went to the window. When Irene looked out, she saw one of the men-at-arms walking in the garden, with the moonlight glancing on his armor. She was just going to tap on the window and call him, for she wanted to tell him about it, when she bethought herself that might wake Ludi, and she would put her to bed again. So Irene resolved to go to the window of another room and call him from there. It was so much nicer to have somebody to talk to than to lie awake in bed with the burning pain in her hand. So she opened the door very gently and went in through the nursery, which did not look into the garden, to the other window. But when she came to the foot of the old staircase, there was the moon shining down from some window high up, and making the worm-eaten oak look very strange and delicate and lovely. In a moment she was putting her little feet one after the other in the silvery path up the stair, looking behind as she went, to see the shadow they made in the middle of the silver. Some little girls would have been afraid to find themselves thus alone in the middle of the night, but Irene was a princess. As she went slowly up the stair, not quite sure that she was not dreaming, suddenly a great longing woke up in her heart to try once more whether she could not find the old lady with the silvery hair. If she was a dream, she said to herself, then I am the likelier to find her if I am dreaming. So up and up Irene went, stair after stair, till she came to the many rooms, all just as she had seen them before. Through passage after passage she softly sped, comforting herself that if she should lose her way it would not matter much, because when she woke she would find herself in her own bed, with Ludi not far off. But, as if she had known every step of the way, she walked straight to the door at the foot of the narrow stair that led to the tower. What if I should really find my beautiful old grandmother up there, she said to herself, as she crept up the steep stairs. When she reached the top, she stood a moment listening in the dark, for there was no moon there. Yes, it was the hum of the spinning wheel. What a diligent grandmother to work both day and night! She tapped gently at the door. Come in, Irene, said a sweet voice. The princess opened the door and entered. There was the moonlight streaming in at the window, and in the middle of the moonlight sat the old lady in her black dress with the white lace, and her silvery hair mingling with the moonlight, so that you could not have told which was which. Come in, Irene, she said again. Can you tell me what I am spinning? She speaks, thought Irene, just as if she had seen me 5 minutes ago, or yesterday. No, Irene answered. I don't know what you are spinning. Please, I thought you were a dream. Why couldn't I find you before, great-grandmother? That you are hardly old enough to understand, she responded. But you would have found me sooner if you hadn't come to think I was a dream. I will give you one reason, though, why you couldn't find me. I didn't want you to find me. Why, please? Asked Irene. Because I did not want Ludi to know I was here. But you told me to tell Ludi, asked Irene. Yes, but I knew Ludi would not believe you. If she were to see me sitting here, she wouldn't believe me either. Why? Because she couldn't. She would rub her eyes and go away and say she felt queer, and felt half of it and more, and then say it all had been a dream. Just like me, said Irene, feeling very much ashamed of herself. Yes, a good deal like you, but not just like you, for you've come again. And Ludi wouldn't have come again. She would have said, no, no, she would have had enough of this nonsense. Is that bad of Ludi, then? It would be bad of you. I've never done anything for Ludi. And you did wash my face and hands for me, said Irene, beginning to cry. The old lady smiled a sweet smile and said, I'm not vexed with you, my child, nor with Ludi either. But I don't want you to say anything more to Ludi about me. If she should ask you, you must just be silent. But I do not think she will ask you. All the time they talked, the old lady kept on spinning. You haven't told me yet what I am spinning, she said. Because I don't know, said Irene. It's very pretty stuff. It was indeed very pretty stuff. There was a good bunch of it on the distaff attached to the spinning wheel, and in the moonlight it shone like, what shall I say it was like? It was not white enough for silver. Yes, it was like silver, but it shone gray rather than white, and glittered only a little. And the thread the old lady drew out from it was so fine that Irene could hardly see it. I'm spinning this for you, my child. For me? What am I to do with it? I will tell you by and by. But first I will tell you what it is. It is spider webs, of a particular kind. My pigeons bring it to me from over the great sea. There's only one forest where the spiders live who make this particular kind, the finest and the strongest of any. I have nearly finished my present job. What is on the rock now will be enough. I have a week's worth there yet, though, she added, looking at the bunch. Did you work all day and all night, too, great-great-great-grandmother? Said the princess, thinking to be very polite with so many greats. I'm not quite so great as all that, the lady answered, smiling almost merrily. If you call me grandmother, that will do. No, I don't work every night, only moonlit nights, and then no longer when the moon shines upon my wheel. I shan't work much longer tonight. And what will you do next, great-grandmother? Go to bed. Would you like to see my bedroom? She asked. Yes, that I should, answered Irene. Then I think I won't work any longer tonight. I shall be in good time. The old lady rose and left her wheel standing just as it was. You should see there was no good in putting it away, for where there was not any furniture, there was no danger of being untidy. Then the lady took Irene by the hand, but it was her bad hand, and Irene gave a little cry of pain. My child, said her grandmother, what is the matter? Irene held her hand into the moonlight, that the old lady might see it, and told her all about it, at which she looked very grave. But she only said, Give me your other hand, and, having let her out upon the little dark landing, opened the door to the opposite side of it. What was Irene's surprise was the loveliest room she had seen in all her life. It was large and lofty and dome-shaped. From the center hung a lamp as round as a ball, shining as if with the brightest moonlight, which made everything visible in the room, though not so clearly that the princess could tell what many of the things were. A large oval bed stood in the middle, with a coverlet of rose color, and velvet curtains all around it of a lovely pale blue. The walls were also blue, spangled all over with what looked like stars of silver. The old lady had left her, and going to a strange-looking cabinet, opened it and took out a curious silver casket. Then she sat down on a low chair, and, calling Irene, made her kneel before her while she looked at her hand. Having examined it, she opened the casket and took from it a little ointment. The sweetest odor filled the room, like that of roses and lilies, and she rubbed the ointment gently all over the hot, swollen hand. Her touch was so pleasant and cool that it seemed to drive away the pain and heat wherever it came. Oh, grandmother, it is so nice, said Irene. Thank you, thank you. Then the old lady went to a chest of drawers and took out a large handkerchief of gossamer-like fabric, which she tied around her hand. I don't think I can let you go away tonight, she said. Would you like to sleep here with me? Oh, yes, yes, dear grandmother, said Irene. You won't be afraid, then, to go to the bed with such an old woman? No, you are so very beautiful, grandmother. But I'm very old, said the lady. And I suppose I am very young. You wouldn't mind sleeping with such a very young woman in the same bed, grandmother? You sweet little princess, said the lady, and leaned towards her and kissed her on the forehead. Then she got a large silver basin, and having poured some water into it, made Irene sit in the chair and washed her feet. This done, she was ready for bed. And oh, what a delicious bed it was! She could hardly have told you she was lying upon anything. She felt nothing but the softness. The old lady laid next to Irene. Why don't you put out your moon? Said the princess. That never goes out, night or day, the lady answered. In the darkest night, if any of my pigeons are out on a message, they can always see my moon and know where to fly to. But if somebody besides the pigeons were to see it, somebody about the house, I mean, they would come to look and find out that it was you. Better for them, then, said the old lady. But it does not happen above 5 times in 100 years that anyone does see it. The greater part of those who do take it for a meteor wink their eyes and forget it again. Besides, nobody could find the room except those that I wanted to. Besides, again, I will tell you a secret. If the light were to go out, you would fancy yourself lying in a bare garret on a heap of old straw, and you would not see the pleasant things around you all the time. I hope the light will never go out, said the princess. I hope not, but it is time, and we both went to sleep. Shall I take you in my arms? The little princess snuggled close to the old lady, who took her in both arms. Oh dear, this is so nice, said the princess. I didn't know anything in the world would be so comfortable. I must put you to one trial, though. Not a very hard one, I hope. This night in a week you must come back to me. If you don't, I do not know when you may find me again, and you will soon want me very much. Oh, please, don't let me forget. You shall not forget. The only question is whether you believe I am anywhere, whether you will believe I am anything but a dream. You may be sure I will do all I can to help you come, but it will rest with you after all. On the night of next Friday, you must come to me. Mind you. I will try, said the princess. Then good night, said the old lady, and kissed the forehead of the little girl. In a moment more, the little princess was dreaming in the midst of the loveliest dreams, of summer seas and moonlight and mossy springs and great murmuring trees and beds of wild flowers with such odors as she had never smelled before. But, after all, no dream could be more lovely than what she had left behind when she fell asleep. In the morning, she found herself in her own bed. There was no handkerchief or anything else on her hand. Only a sweet odor lingered about it. The swelling had all gone down. The prick of the brooch had vanished. In fact, her hand was perfectly well. And that's the end of chapter 11. What do you think? Do you like her great-great-grandmother? Should we trust her great-great-grandmother? Seems like she uses magic, doesn't she? I want to find out more about her. She did help Irene, though, with her hand. So let's see. Join me tomorrow when we read more of The Princess and the Goblin. Thanks for reading with me. Have a fun day.